The sun was slowly dipping behind the trees, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the Johnson family was preparing for their weekend tradition, a family barbecue in the backyard. The air smelled faintly of grilled vegetables and fresh bread, mixed with the sweet scent of blooming flowers from the garden. The children, Emma and Noah, ran around laughing, their shoes kicking up tiny clouds of dust from the well-kept lawn. The sound of their joy seemed to echo through the peaceful street, but little did anyone know, not all eyes were filled with happiness. Mr. Johnson, a tall man with a kind face and a calm demeanor, was carefully flipping burgers on the grill. He hummed a soft tune under his breath, occasionally glancing at the kids playing near the swings. His wife, Sarah, moved gracefully between the picnic table and the kitchen door, arranging colorful plates and glasses while keeping an eye on the food. Everything seemed perfect, simple, happy, and ordinary, but there was a subtle tension lingering, like the quiet before a storm. Across the street, in a house shaded by towering oak trees, the Johnsons' neighbor, Mr. Clark, stood at his window peering out. His face was tight with disapproval, eyes narrowing at the laughter and chatter echoing from the yard. He tapped his fingers impatiently against the windowsill, muttering to himself about noise and careless neighbors. The faint aroma of the barbecue drifted across the street, but instead of hunger or curiosity, it seemed to fuel a sense of irritation within him. Every laugh, every cheer, felt like a challenge. Back in the backyard, Emma and Noah had discovered a tiny frog near the flower bed. They squealed with delight as they carefully picked it up, showing it to their parents. Mr. Johnson smiled warmly, his eyes softening at the sight of his children's excitement. Sarah chuckled and reminded them not to scare the little creature. The moment was simple, tender, yet it created a stark contrast to the growing tension across the street. As the kids ran back to the swings, Mr. Johnson noticed something odd, a shadow flickering near the neighbor's fence. He tilted his head, studying the figure briefly, but dismissed it, assuming it was just a trick of the evening light. Little did he know, Mr. Clark was moving closer to his phone, gripping it tightly as if it were a weapon rather than a simple device. The neighbor's face was a mask of determination, his lips pressed into a thin line. Every laugh, every cheer from the Johnsons seemed louder in his mind, each sound a reason to act. The Johnsons continued their preparations. Mr. Johnson seasoned the meat with care, flipping the burgers with precision, while Sarah laid out a basket of fresh corn and baked potatoes. The kids, oblivious to the tension next door, ran around with boundless energy, chasing each other and occasionally falling in giggles. Their innocence made the scene feel even more fragile, as though the peace of the evening could shatter with the slightest disturbance. Suddenly, a faint ringing sound cut through the air, the neighbor's phone. Mr. Clark's fingers trembled as he dialed a number, speaking in low, urgent tones. He explained, in clipped sentences, that there was suspicious activity at the Johnsons' house. The words seemed dramatic, almost unbelievable, yet the seriousness in his voice suggested he truly believed it. On the other end, the operator listened, nodding silently, typing notes into a computer. Within moments, the message had been sent, alerting officers that they might need to check a situation at the Johnsons' home. Back in the backyard, life continued as if nothing had changed. Mr. Johnson checked the grill, turning the meat carefully, while Sarah brought out a pitcher of lemonade, the condensation dripping onto her hands. The children had settled near the swings again, Emma showing Noah how to gently hold the frog. Laughter filled the air, innocent and pure. But a shadow of unease began to creep over the Johnsons, though they did not know why. Mr. Johnson paused for a moment, sensing something, though he could not name it. Something about the quiet on the street felt different, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the joy in their backyard. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. The lights from the neighbor's house flickered briefly, and for a moment, Mr. Johnson caught a glimpse of a figure watching from the edge of the property. He smiled faintly, telling himself it was probably nothing, just someone curious about a happy family evening. But even as he reassured himself, there was a whisper of unease he couldn't shake. The kind of feeling that hints something unexpected is about to happen, something that could turn a peaceful night into a night of tension. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark had returned to his window, glancing out intermittently. He watched the smoke rise from the grill, the kids running, the parents laughing. Every detail fueled a strange mix of envy and irritation in his mind. He tapped his phone again, checking the time, counting the minutes before the authorities might arrive. The night air, cool and calm, contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in his mind. As the Johnsons finished setting the table, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the scent of the barbecue. Mr. Johnson called the children over, telling them to wash their hands before eating. Emma and Noah scampered off to the kitchen door, still excited, while Sarah brought out a bowl of fresh salad. The moment was perfect in its simplicity, the kind of peace that people rarely notice until it is threatened. But across the street, the tension was mounting. Mr. Clark glanced down at his phone once more, his finger hovering over the screen as he considered calling again. His eyes were fixed on the Johnsons' backyard, as if waiting for something to justify his growing frustration. The laughter, the joy, the ordinary happiness of a family evening, it all seemed like a provocation in his mind. As night slowly approached, the Johnsons lit small lanterns around the yard, creating a warm glow that made the space feel magical. Mr. Johnson took a deep breath, enjoying the sight of his family together. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that nothing could disturb this peaceful evening. Yet, even as he smiled, a faint shadow moved across the street. A phone buzzed quietly in the neighbor's hand. The calm of the evening had begun to crack, and though the Johnsons didn't yet know it, their simple family barbecue was about to become the center of an unexpected and tense story. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the sounds of joy, the smell of barbecue, and the unspoken tension from across the street. The children laughed, oblivious to what was coming. Sarah adjusted the plates on the table, humming softly. Mr. Johnson looked around, satisfied with the simple perfection of the evening. And across the street, Mr. Clark's eyes never left the Johnsons' backyard, the phone in his hand a silent promise that the calm of the evening would not last much longer. The quiet of the evening was suddenly broken by the soft hum of a phone vibrating. Across the street, Mr. Clark stared at his screen, fingers tight around the device. He had made the call, and now he waited, heart pounding, convinced that something serious would happen at the Johnsons' house. His voice earlier had been sharp, urgent, full of authority as he described the suspicious activity. He had not noticed the warmth and laughter spilling from the backyard, only the small annoyances, the sound of children running, the smoke from the grill drifting toward his house, the feeling that the world was not following the rules he imagined it should. Inside the Johnsons' home, the family continued to enjoy the simple pleasures of their evening. Emma and Noah were washing their hands at the kitchen sink, giggling and talking about the tiny frog they had discovered. Sarah poured lemonade into glasses, the ice clinking softly. Mr. Johnson flipped the burgers one last time, setting them carefully on a tray. The warmth of the home seemed to protect them from any outside disturbance, and yet, a subtle tension lingered in the air, something that even the children seemed to sense. The first police car appeared as a distant set of flashing lights, barely visible from the backyard. Emma squealed with delight, thinking it was part of a game, while Noah ran toward the window to get a better look. "Are they coming for us?" he asked, not fully understanding the situation but sensing the unusualness of it. Mr. Johnson glanced toward the street, calm but aware. There was no panic in his eyes, only a quiet readiness, a confidence that something was about to happen but that he could handle it. Sarah paused, noticing her husband's expression. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, a hint of concern in her voice. He nodded, brushing off her worry with a gentle smile. "Just some lights on the street," he said. "Probably nothing." But even as he reassured her, the tension grew. The sounds of tires crunching over gravel and the distant hum of engines approached. From the neighbor's side, Mr. Clark watched eagerly, excitement mixing with fear. The police were responding. He had done the right thing, or so he thought. His chest tightened as he imagined the officers walking into the Johnsons' backyard, ready to question, to investigate, perhaps even to scold. He had called the authorities to protect the neighborhood, to stop what he saw as chaos. And now, the moment he had been waiting for was finally here. The first officer stepped out of the vehicle, uniform crisp and badge shining in the dim evening light. Two more followed, their steps careful, observing the scene. The family, still unaware of the call, looked up as the officers approached. Mr. Johnson met them with a calm, steady gaze. He set the tray of food down and walked toward the edge of the backyard, hands visible but relaxed. The officers hesitated for a brief moment, sensing something unusual in the way he moved, not fear, not aggression, but confidence, quiet authority. "Good evening," Mr. Johnson said calmly. "How can I help you tonight?" His voice was firm, yet friendly, carrying a tone that demanded respect without needing to raise itself. The officers exchanged glances, subtly impressed by his composure. It was unusual to see someone so calm in what they thought might be a tense situation. Mr. Clark, standing across the street, watched eagerly, imagining the confrontation he had expected. But instead of chaos, he saw calm. The family was smiling, friendly, unafraid. The children waved at the officers, oblivious to the growing tension. And Mr. Johnson moved with purpose, confident and in control. The neighbor felt a twinge of doubt creep into his mind, though he quickly dismissed it, blaming his imagination. The officers, unsure of what to do next, started asking polite questions. "We received a call about a possible disturbance," one said, glancing at the children, then at the grill. "We just wanted to check if everything is all right." Mr. Johnson nodded, listening carefully, then responded, "Everything is fine here. We're just having a family barbecue. Nothing suspicious at all." But as the conversation continued, Mr. Johnson's calm demeanor hinted at more than just politeness. There was a quiet authority in the way he spoke, the kind that made people pause and think before speaking carelessly. The officers began to notice it, the way he held himself, the confidence in his voice, the subtle control over the scene. The tension in the air shifted slightly, no longer just worry about a neighbor complaint but curiosity and respect toward the man standing in the backyard. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark's frustration began to rise. How could a simple barbecue be so ordinary? Why did the family seem untouched by the presence of the police? His chest tightened, and he gripped his phone again, tempted to call back, to make sure they would take action. But deep down, a small doubt had entered his mind. Something about the father, the way he carried himself, did not match the ordinary neighbor he expected. There was a quiet power in him that made Mr. Clark hesitate. Emma and Noah ran around the backyard, still playing, unaware of the tension that now crackled in the air like static. Sarah kept one hand on the table, one eye on her children, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Mr. Johnson glanced at his family briefly, offering a reassuring smile. He knew exactly how to handle the situation, and yet, he allowed the officers and even the neighbor to believe they were in control, letting the suspense build naturally. As the evening continued, the officers politely stepped back, nodding at Mr. Johnson. "Thank you for your cooperation," one said, sensing there was more to this man than met the eye. They returned to their vehicles, their curiosity and respect growing, while Mr. Clark remained across the street, confused and unsettled. He had expected confrontation, perhaps embarrassment for the Johnsons, maybe even authority from the police on his side, but instead, all he felt was unease. The family returned to their dinner, plates filled with freshly grilled food. Laughter slowly returned to the backyard, but a small spark of tension lingered, unspoken and unresolved. Mr. Johnson glanced once more toward the street, eyes calm but sharp, aware that the evening's events were only the beginning. Something had shifted in the neighborhood, a subtle warning that ordinary appearances could be deceiving. Mr. Clark retreated back into his house, slamming the door quietly behind him. His mind raced with questions and doubts. How could a simple family be so confident? Why did he feel uneasy for the first time, even after calling the authorities? Across the street, the Johnsons continued their evening, calm and joyful, unaware that the night had already become a story of tension, authority, and hidden strength. The sun had disappeared completely, leaving only the soft glow of the backyard lanterns. The air was warm, filled with smells of cooked food and the faint scent of flowers. The laughter of the children blended with the hum of the evening, but the shadow of what had just occurred remained. The calm of the backyard was intact, yet a subtle suspense hung in the air, as if the story had only just begun. The police cars pulled slowly into the quiet street, their lights flashing faintly in the dim evening. The Johnsons' backyard, glowing with lanterns, looked peaceful and warm, completely at odds with the urgency the officers brought. Mr. Johnson stepped forward, his calm presence almost magnetic, while Sarah held the children close, trying to mask the subtle tension she felt. Emma and Noah were curious, peeking around the table, sensing something unusual but not entirely understanding what. The officers approached carefully, their boots crunching against the gravel driveway. Each step seemed heavier than the last, the silence of the neighborhood making their movements louder than they would have imagined. Mr. Clark, still standing across the street, watched eagerly, convinced that justice would finally be served, or at least, that the family would feel the weight of the law he had summoned. But he did not notice the way Mr. Johnson's shoulders squared, the faint tilt of his head, the way his calm gaze seemed to measure every movement of the approaching officers. "Good evening," Mr. Johnson said again, his voice steady and welcoming, yet carrying a quiet authority that made the officers pause. "I assume you're here about a complaint?" His tone was polite, but there was a subtle edge to it, a sense that he was aware of far more than he let on. The officers exchanged glances, sensing an unusual confidence in the man before them. One officer stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Yes, sir. We received a call about a possible disturbance at this address. Just checking to make sure everything is okay." His eyes flicked toward the children playing near the swings. The innocence of the moment seemed to contrast sharply with the reason they had come. He gestured politely to the backyard, as if to invite conversation without confrontation. Mr. Johnson nodded, smiling faintly. "Everything is perfectly fine. We're just having a family barbecue. Nothing suspicious at all." His tone was calm, steady, but there was an unmistakable command in the way he spoke. The officers felt it immediately, an invisible authority that made them instinctively step back, to give him space, to acknowledge the control he seemed to hold effortlessly. Across the street, Mr. Clark's eyes widened. The family had not panicked. They had not apologized or even seemed worried. And the father, something about him did not fit the ordinary neighbor he had expected. Mr. Johnson stood tall, calm, yet every movement was deliberate. The neighbor's chest tightened. He could feel a creeping sense of doubt begin to take root, though he quickly tried to suppress it. The children, sensing the subtle tension, paused in their play. Emma clutched Noah's hand, her eyes wide, but Mr. Johnson knelt briefly, smiling reassuringly at them. "It's okay," he whispered, "just adults talking." The words were simple, yet the calm they carried had a strange power. Even the officers seemed to soften slightly, no longer just responding to a complaint but carefully observing the man who commanded the scene without raising his voice. Sarah adjusted a lantern on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep the evening normal. She watched her husband closely, knowing that he had a plan, though she did not yet know what it was. There was something different about the way he carried himself tonight, something that made the air feel charged, as if the calm could shift into action at any moment. The officer asked a few more routine questions, noting the laughter, the food, the children's innocence. Mr. Johnson answered each calmly, politely, but his words carried weight. There was no hesitation, no flinch. Every sentence seemed carefully measured, projecting authority without aggression. The officers began to sense that this was not a typical complaint, not a typical family barbecue. Something about this man suggested experience, respect, and power, quietly commanding attention. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark shifted nervously across the street. He had imagined confrontation, conflict, maybe even embarrassment for the Johnsons. Instead, he saw calm, controlled confidence. His plan to expose what he thought was chaos was failing before his eyes. The father was not intimidated, the children were unharmed, and the officers seemed to sense it too. Doubt gnawed at him, an unfamiliar feeling he was not used to experiencing. As the conversation continued, Mr. Johnson's gaze flicked toward the neighbor's house. He did not raise his voice, he did not point, he simply looked. There was an unspoken message in the quiet, a subtle warning that he was aware of everything. Mr. Clark felt a shiver run down his spine, though he did not understand why. The authority the father held was invisible, almost instinctive, and it unsettled him more than any argument or complaint ever could. The officers nodded politely, sensing the conversation was over. "Thank you for your cooperation," one said. They retreated slowly to their vehicles, the quiet hum of engines filling the space as they prepared to leave. The tension in the air remained, but now it was mixed with curiosity and respect. Mr. Clark, still across the street, felt a rising panic inside him. The father's calm, the family's composure, the subtle control of the situation, all of it undermined the sense of power he had expected to hold. Emma and Noah returned to their play, laughing quietly, the danger they did not understand fading like mist in the morning sun. Sarah placed the last plate on the table, taking a deep breath as she tried to settle the tension in her own chest. Mr. Johnson returned to the grill, flipping a burger with a precise motion, though his eyes remained sharp, scanning the street, reading the tension that lingered like a storm cloud. The evening resumed, but it was no longer ordinary. The lights from the lanterns glowed softly, but shadows seemed longer now, stretching across the lawn in strange patterns. The children's laughter filled the air, but it had a fragile quality, as though it existed in defiance of the invisible tension that had entered their world. Mr. Johnson moved among them calmly, a silent guardian, aware of every glance, every movement, every breath. Across the street, Mr. Clark had retreated into his house, but his eyes remained on the backyard through the blinds. Doubt, fear, and confusion twisted together inside him. He had called the police thinking he had control, thinking he could manipulate the situation, but he was wrong. The father in the Johnson family held a quiet power, a calm authority that made him feel small, insignificant, unsure of what to do next. As the night deepened, the family finished preparing their meal. Plates were full, glasses filled with lemonade, and the faint smoke from the grill swirled into the cool evening air. Mr. Johnson smiled faintly at his family, the warmth of his eyes reaching Sarah and the children, reassuring them. Though the tension still lingered across the street, inside the backyard, there was a fragile peace, a sense that no matter what happened, they were safe. But the shadow of the neighbor's suspicion had not disappeared. Mr. Clark's unease lingered, a silent promise that the calm of the evening could be disrupted again. And Mr. Johnson, aware of every nuance, every flicker of doubt, every hidden tension, knew that the night was far from over. Something was coming, something unexpected, and when it arrived, he would be ready. The family would face it together, and the neighbor would learn, in his own way, that appearances could be deceiving. The lanterns flickered in the gentle breeze, the laughter of children mingled with the soft hum of night insects, and the Johnsons continued their evening as if nothing had happened. But across the street, Mr. Clark felt the first real sting of fear, the unsettling realization that the man he had underestimated might not only be prepared, but unstoppable. The calm before the storm had ended, and now the night held a new tension, one that promised drama, suspense, and unexpected revelation. The officers had stepped back toward their vehicles, giving the Johnsons a moment of space. Mr. Johnson's calm gaze swept across the backyard, lingering on his family for a heartbeat. He could see the subtle tension in Sarah's eyes, the nervous curiosity in Emma and Noah. Everything seemed normal again, yet the evening had already changed. Something was building, something that would not remain hidden for long. Across the street, Mr. Clark stood at his window, watching with growing unease. He had expected to see embarrassment, fear, maybe even conflict in the Johnsons' faces. Instead, he saw calm, order, and quiet confidence. And it was the father who unsettled him most. Mr. Johnson moved with a controlled grace, every word, every gesture measured. The neighbor felt a creeping doubt, though he tried to ignore it, telling himself that this was just luck, that the family's composure was nothing more than coincidence. Then, Mr. Johnson straightened, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in anger, but in quiet intent. He raised one hand and spoke clearly, calmly, yet with undeniable authority. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low but firm, "I believe there is some confusion here. I am the new police chief for this district. You may recognize me, but let me assure you, this family and this neighborhood are under my watch." A stunned silence fell over the backyard. The officers froze mid-step, their expressions shifting from casual professionalism to surprise, then respect. One of them blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what he had just heard. The authority in Mr. Johnson's voice, the calm confidence he radiated, it was undeniable. He was not just the father of the family. He was the law, quietly present, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. Sarah gasped softly, placing her hand over her mouth, though not in fear. She was proud, yet anxious, knowing that the revelation would completely change the dynamic of the evening. Emma and Noah's eyes widened, staring at their father as if seeing him for the first time. A new sense of admiration mixed with awe filled the air. The children, innocent and curious, were too young to fully understand the weight of the words, but they felt the change immediately. Their father had transformed from a warm, loving parent into a figure of power and authority. The officers recovered first, their expressions a mix of respect and surprise. "Chief," one asked quietly, almost hesitantly, glancing at the others for confirmation. The term hung in the air like a spark, igniting new awareness. The presence of authority had shifted the energy of the evening entirely. What had seemed like a routine complaint was now a delicate moment of revelation, and the officers could feel the weight of it pressing subtly into their awareness. Across the street, Mr. Clark froze. His hands tightened on the window frame, knuckles white. He had expected to hold power over the situation. He had imagined the police supporting him, giving weight to his complaint, perhaps even scolding the Johnsons. Instead, the man he had dismissed as just a neighbor was far more than that. Mr. Johnson was the new police chief, and every ounce of calm authority in his posture reinforced the reality that Mr. Clark's plan had backfired before it had even begun. Mr. Johnson's gaze swept over the backyard one more time, lingering briefly on the children playing near the swings. "This is my family," he said, voice steady, "and no complaint, no misunderstanding, and no false accusation will compromise their safety or peace." His words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. The officers nodded subtly, understanding that this man was not only in command of the law but also in command of the moment, the energy of the neighborhood, and the respect of everyone around him. Sarah exhaled slowly, relief mingling with awe. She had known her husband had strength, but seeing it revealed in this way, in front of the officers and the neighbor, was both exhilarating and humbling. Emma and Noah ran toward their father, seeking reassurance, while he knelt to greet them, still calm, still commanding respect. "It's okay," he said gently, ruffling Emma's hair and taking Noah's hand. "Nothing to worry about." His tone was soft, yet unshakable, a perfect balance of parent and authority figure. Mr. Clark's mind raced. How could he have been so wrong? The man he had judged, dismissed, and tried to control was not only calm under pressure but also held the highest authority in the neighborhood. Fear, confusion, and a hint of shame mixed together, creating a storm of emotions he had never expected to feel. He wanted to retreat, to hide, yet a small, stubborn part of him resisted, clinging to the idea that he could still assert some power. The officers, now fully aware of the situation, stepped back completely, giving Mr. Johnson space to guide the evening. They no longer needed to intervene, the man in front of them commanded everything with quiet authority. One officer muttered under his breath, "Well, that explains it," while another nodded subtly, acknowledging the shift in control. In the backyard, the family began to relax again, the tension replaced by a renewed sense of security. The children returned to their play, Emma hopping around the swings and Noah chasing the frog they had found earlier. Sarah smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had always known her husband was extraordinary, but seeing him reveal it in such a calm, decisive way left her speechless. Mr. Johnson returned to the grill, flipping a burger with deliberate care. He glanced around, ensuring everything was in place, his eyes catching the subtle shadows across the street. He knew Mr. Clark was still watching, still uneasy. He allowed himself a small, knowing smile, not cruel, but confident, a quiet message that the situation was under control. The neighbor had underestimated him, but the revelation had changed everything. The lanterns flickered softly in the gentle evening breeze, casting long shadows across the lawn. The smell of grilled meat and fresh bread filled the air, blending with the faint scent of flowers from the garden. Everything seemed peaceful, yet the night had transformed. The calm of the backyard was now layered with authority, respect, and a subtle warning to anyone who might think to interfere. Mr. Clark finally stepped back from the window, the weight of reality pressing down on him. He had misjudged the situation, misjudged the father, and misjudged the family. The police chief of the district was standing in the Johnsons' backyard, calm, composed, and fully in control. Any sense of power he had hoped to claim evaporated in that instant, leaving only unease and regret. The family resumed their barbecue, laughter slowly returning, mingling with the soft hum of the night. Mr. Johnson kept one eye on the street, aware of the lingering presence of the neighbor, but confident that no further disruption would occur. He had revealed his secret, asserted authority, and protected his family, all without raising his voice or losing his calm. As the evening continued, the warmth of the lanterns, the aroma of food, and the laughter of the children created a fragile, perfect moment. Yet the tension of the night, the revelation, and the subtle shift in power had left a lasting impression. The calm had been broken, authority established, and the family's strength revealed. Across the street, Mr. Clark's unease remained, a quiet promise that this night would be remembered, and a subtle warning that appearances can be deceiving. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the soft scent of grilled food and flowers through the quiet neighborhood. In the Johnsons' backyard, the family had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Emma and Noah had returned to their playful antics, but their laughter now carried a cautious edge, as if they could sense the tension lingering across the street. Sarah adjusted a lantern on the picnic table, her fingers trembling slightly as she tried to mask her unease. Mr. Johnson moved calmly between the grill and the table, flipping burgers and keeping an eye on his family. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, yet casual, like a conductor guiding an orchestra with quiet authority. Across the street, Mr. Clark's patience had run thin. He could no longer stand idly by, watching his imagined power slipping away. The revelation of Mr. Johnson's position as the new police chief had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Fear and frustration warred within him, twisting into a strange, obsessive determination. He stormed out of his house, his face red with anger, and marched toward the edge of his yard, glaring at the Johnsons as he shouted across the street. "You think you can just flaunt your authority? Acting like you're better than everyone," he yelled, his voice sharp and tense, carrying over the backyard. The children froze mid-play, Emma clutching Noah's hand. Sarah took a step closer to the children, her expression a mix of worry and quiet confidence. She knew her husband would handle this, but she could not help the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Mr. Johnson turned slowly, his expression calm, almost serene. He stepped forward, his gaze locking onto the neighbor with quiet intensity. "Mr. Clark," he said evenly, his voice steady and controlled, "this family, and this backyard, are under my care. You are welcome to observe, but you will not create chaos here. I suggest you return to your house and reflect on your actions." The neighbor's mouth opened, then closed, caught off guard by the calm authority in the father's words. He had expected confrontation, maybe fear, or at least hesitation, but he found none. Instead, Mr. Johnson stood firm, unshaken, radiating quiet power. The officers who had lingered near their vehicles now watched from a distance, sensing the tension and respect that hung in the air. Emma and Noah clung to their mother, peeking around her legs, wide-eyed. "Dad, what's going to happen?" Emma whispered, her voice small and uncertain. Mr. Johnson crouched slightly to meet her eyes, ruffling her hair. "Nothing will happen, Emma," he said gently. "Everything is under control. Just enjoy the evening, okay?" His words were soft, but there was no doubt in their strength. They carried reassurance, authority, and calm all at once. Sarah exhaled slowly, relieved that her husband's presence diffused the situation so effectively. She could see the neighbor hesitating, unsure of his next move. Mr. Clark's face was twisted with frustration, his hands shaking as he tried to muster courage, but the confidence and calm of Mr. Johnson left him at a loss. He wanted to argue, to assert himself, but every instinct told him that this was not the time, and perhaps not the place. Mr. Johnson took a deliberate step closer to the fence, closing the invisible distance between the two properties. "I understand your concern," he said evenly, "but your fear has no basis. This family is safe, and your complaints are unnecessary. I suggest you allow us to enjoy our evening without interference." His tone was polite yet commanding, leaving no room for argument. The neighbor could feel the weight of his authority pressing against him like an invisible barrier. Mr. Clark opened his mouth again, but words failed him. The mixture of frustration, disbelief, and fear made him stumble over what he wanted to say. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated the man before him. The police chief was calm, confident, and completely in control, and the neighbor's attempts to assert dominance now seemed futile. Emma and Noah watched, sensing the tension, yet feeling safe under their father's protective presence. The simple strength of his words, his posture, and his calm demeanor created a bubble of security around them, shielding them from the fear that might have otherwise taken hold. Sarah smiled faintly, proud of her husband, her eyes reflecting admiration and relief. She knew that he had handled the situation without raising his voice or losing his calm, and that this was a lesson in quiet strength for the entire family. The neighbor finally stepped back, defeated but still simmering with frustration. He muttered something under his breath and retreated slowly toward his house, glancing over his shoulder to make sure he was not being watched. Mr. Johnson watched him go, eyes sharp but calm, knowing that the immediate threat had passed. The officers, who had observed the interaction, nodded subtly to one another, recognizing the quiet authority of the man they had just witnessed. In the backyard, the Johnsons resumed their evening. The children returned to their games, laughing softly, while Sarah carried plates of food back to the table. Mr. Johnson returned to the grill, flipping burgers with practiced precision, his eyes scanning the street for any lingering threat. The tension of the evening had shifted, replaced by calm, yet a subtle undercurrent of vigilance remained, like the quiet hum of a storm that had passed but left its mark on the air. The lanterns flickered gently in the night breeze, casting shadows across the lawn, blending warmth and tension into a single, delicate balance. Mr. Johnson moved among his family, guiding the evening with careful attention. Every laugh, every word, every gesture was measured, creating an atmosphere of safety and quiet authority. He had shown the neighbor that threats, no matter how loud or confident, could not shake the calm and strength of his family. Across the street, Mr. Clark sat back behind his blinds, frustration and uncertainty twisting together inside him. He had hoped for control, confrontation, and perhaps even embarrassment for the Johnsons, but none of that had occurred. Instead, he had witnessed quiet authority, patience, and a subtle demonstration of power that left him shaken. He stared at the backyard, unable to fully comprehend how he had been outmatched without any visible effort. As the night deepened, the Johnsons continued their dinner. The smell of grilled meat and baked corn filled the air, the children's laughter blending with the soft sounds of evening insects. Sarah poured lemonade into glasses, smiling softly, while Mr. Johnson glanced toward the street one last time, ensuring that all was calm. The neighbor had retreated, but the memory of his confrontation remained a quiet reminder of vigilance and control. The backyard, lit by lanterns, seemed to glow even warmer now, a safe haven from the tension across the street. Emma and Noah laughed, chasing fireflies, unaware of the lesson in authority and calm their father had just imparted. Sarah placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, squeezing gently in quiet gratitude and admiration. Mr. Johnson smiled faintly, returning to his place at the grill, aware that he had handled the evening's confrontation perfectly, without anger, without aggression, and with complete control. The night stretched on, peaceful yet charged with subtle tension. The neighbor, defeated and unsure, remained across the street, while the Johnson family enjoyed their evening, united, calm, and safe. And while the conflict had passed for now, the lesson had been learned: true authority is quiet, patient, and unwavering, and it can turn even the most tense confrontation into a story of respect, calm, and quiet power. The night had settled over the neighborhood, quiet now except for the soft hum of crickets and the distant glow of street lights. In the Johnsons' backyard, the family returned to their meal, laughter slowly returning but carrying a subtle edge of alertness. Mr. Johnson moved with calm precision, ensuring that the children were safe, the food was ready, and that the lingering tension from the neighbor's outburst had not broken the fragile peace. Across the street, Mr. Clark remained behind his blinds, fuming quietly. He had retreated, yet the embarrassment and frustration he felt were hard to shake. He had imagined power, imagined control, but the calm authority of Mr. Johnson had undone him. His chest tightened, and a sense of shame began to creep in, though he refused to acknowledge it fully. He hated being wrong, yet the evidence was clear. He had underestimated the family, underestimated the father, and now he had no choice but to watch the evening continue under Mr. Johnson's quiet control. Sensing that the tension still lingered, Mr. Johnson approached the fence separating their yards, his steps measured, calm. He did not shout, he did not wave his arms, but his presence alone seemed to demand attention. "Mr. Clark," he called gently, yet firmly, "I know you were concerned about the noise and what you saw tonight. I want to help you understand something important." His voice carried across the street, calm but filled with quiet authority. The neighbor froze, unsure whether to respond. He had expected anger, confrontation, or perhaps humiliation, but he found none. Instead, the father of the family was speaking with patience, authority, and, most surprising, kindness. Mr. Johnson continued, his eyes softening, his voice steady. "This family is just enjoying a simple evening together. We work hard, we love each other, and we protect one another. Your assumptions caused unnecessary tension, and that is something I hope you will reflect on." Mr. Clark hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to claim that he was only concerned, that he was protecting the neighborhood. Yet every word, every gesture of Mr. Johnson made him pause. There was no anger here, only clarity, calm, and authority. Slowly, he felt the weight of his own actions, the unnecessary tension he had created. For the first time, he realized that respect and understanding were stronger than fear or suspicion. Sarah watched from the side, her hand gently resting on her husband's shoulder, a silent show of support. The children peeked through the swings and lanterns, sensing the conversation without fully understanding it. Mr. Johnson knelt slightly, lowering his voice to a gentle, almost conversational tone. "It is easy to judge, Mr. Clark," he said softly. "It is easy to assume the worst. But when we take a moment to see the truth, to understand one another, we create peace instead of conflict." The neighbor swallowed hard, the words sinking slowly into his mind. He felt a strange mix of embarrassment, awe, and humility. The anger that had driven him across the street was now muted, replaced by a quiet reflection. For the first time, he understood that this family, and their father, were not ordinary. They were strong, patient, and capable of handling conflict with dignity rather than aggression. Mr. Johnson straightened, looking briefly at his children. "Emma, Noah, show Mr. Clark your garden," he said gently. The children ran forward with excitement, pointing out the flowers and tiny frogs, their laughter softening the tension further. The neighbor's eyes followed them, and for a moment, he felt a warmth he had not expected. He realized that what he had feared was harmless, ordinary joy, and that his assumptions had been wrong. The father continued, his voice steady, teaching without preaching. "In life, Mr. Clark, it is not always the loudest voice or the quickest action that matters. It is understanding, patience, and respect that create real strength." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The neighbor, standing frozen in his yard, felt a weight lift slightly, a mixture of relief, shame, and newfound understanding. Sarah joined her husband, speaking softly but firmly. "We all have choices, Mr. Clark," she said. "You can choose suspicion and tension, or you can choose kindness and understanding. Tonight, you saw both, and it is never too late to choose the right path." Her words were simple, but they carried the warmth of experience and truth. The neighbor's shoulders slumped slightly, his fists unclenching. He realized how wrong he had been, how much tension he had created unnecessarily. He opened his mouth to apologize but found that words felt inadequate. Mr. Johnson nodded subtly, as if reading his thoughts, and gave a small, encouraging smile. "Acknowledgement is the first step," he said quietly. "The next step is to act with understanding, and to remember this lesson for the future." For the first time that evening, Mr. Clark truly felt the weight of calm authority, emotional intelligence, and quiet strength. The lesson was clear: fear and assumptions can create conflict, but patience, respect, and understanding resolve it. He felt humbled, almost small, yet enlightened in a way he had never expected. The children returned to the swing set, laughing and playing, while Mr. Johnson guided Sarah to the picnic table. "It is over for tonight," he said softly. "The tension has passed, and our family is safe." The warmth of his voice reassured her, and the laughter of the children filled the backyard once more, blending with the soft hum of evening crickets. Across the street, Mr. Clark retreated into his house, quieter now than before. He had not expected to learn anything tonight, he had only wanted to assert power. Instead, he had been taught a lesson in respect, patience, and understanding. The father he had underestimated had demonstrated that true authority was quiet, composed, and rooted in empathy and integrity. The lanterns flickered gently, casting long shadows across the lawn, and the Johnsons continued their evening, united and safe. The air was filled with warmth, laughter, and the faint aroma of grilled food. The neighbor's presence, though still lingering, was no longer a source of tension. It had been transformed into a subtle reminder of humility and the quiet strength of a family protected by love and authority. As the night deepened, Mr. Johnson glanced toward the street one last time, eyes calm but aware. He had handled the confrontation with patience and wisdom, teaching not only the neighbor but also his children a lesson in courage, authority, and kindness. The evening's events would linger in memory, a story of suspense, emotional growth, and the quiet power of understanding. And in the soft glow of lanterns, with children laughing and parents smiling, the lesson was clear: strength is not shown through anger or fear, but through calm, measured action and the courage to teach others the value of respect and empathy. The night was safe, the tension resolved, and the family's bond stronger than ever, protected not only by authority, but by love and wisdom. The night had settled fully over the neighborhood, casting a soft glow from the streetlights onto quiet lawns. In the Johnsons' backyard, the family resumed their barbecue, the faint smell of grilled meat and corn filling the warm evening air. The children, Emma and Noah, ran between the swings and the picnic table, their laughter lighter now, unburdened by the earlier tension. Sarah carried a plate of freshly grilled burgers to the table, smiling softly, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. Mr. Johnson moved calmly between the grill and the table, flipping burgers with precision while keeping a subtle watch over the street. Across the street, Mr. Clark hesitated at his front door. His mind replayed the evening's events, the calm authority of the father, the patience with which the family had handled his complaints, and the quiet, unshakable strength that had left him stunned. For the first time that night, he realized just how wrong he had been. His assumptions had been hasty, his anger misplaced, and his actions unnecessary. He felt a strange mix of shame, humility, and a desire to make things right. Slowly, he stepped out into his yard, hands in his pockets, trying to appear calm. He cleared his throat and called across the street, his voice quieter this time. "Mr. Johnson." I'm sorry," he said, the words halting but sincere. The neighbor's pride had been a barrier earlier, but now he could not ignore the truth. He had judged unfairly, and he knew it. Mr. Johnson turned, his expression calm, steady, but kind. He nodded slightly, a small smile on his lips. "Thank you, Mr. Clark," he replied evenly. Acknowledging a mistake is always the first step toward understanding. "I appreciate your honesty." His voice carried warmth, but also a quiet strength that reminded the neighbor of the balance of authority and compassion. Emma and Noah peeked through the swings, curious about the exchange. "Dad, is he going to be nice now?" Emma asked, her small voice full of hope. Mr. Johnson crouched to meet her gaze, ruffling her hair gently. "Yes, Emma. He's learning, just like all of us do. Everyone deserves a chance to understand and do better." His words were simple, but they held power. They reassured the children while teaching them the value of patience and empathy. Sarah placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, grateful that the situation had been resolved without anger or fear. "You handled that perfectly," she said softly. Mr. Johnson smiled faintly, returning his attention to the backyard. "Sometimes, it's not about showing power," he said quietly. It's about guiding people to see the right way, even when they resist at first. The neighbor's posture softened, his anger and frustration giving way to reflection. He watched the children play, the family enjoying their evening without interruption, and realized how unnecessary his interference had been. I promise to respect your family from now on, he said hesitantly. I'll think before I act next time. The words were simple, yet they carried genuine change. Mr. Johnson nodded, a subtle, approving gesture. That's all anyone can ask for, he said. Respect, understanding, and reflection. That's how we create peace in a community. The tone was calm, but the authority in his words left no doubt. Lessons had been learned, and the balance of respect was restored. The neighbor finally turned and retreated toward his house, his movements slower, more thoughtful. He glanced back once, a hint of newfound humility in his eyes. Across the street, he reflected on the evening, realizing that he had learned far more than he had anticipated. The lesson was clear: anger and assumptions only create conflict, but calm authority, patience, and guidance bring understanding. Back in the Johnsons' backyard, the family resumed their simple joys. Plates were filled with food, the children laughed as they chased each other, and the warm glow of the lanterns cast a soft light over the scene. Mr. Johnson flipped burgers with steady hands, his eyes scanning the surroundings, ensuring that everything remained peaceful. The air was filled with the soft hum of night insects, mingling with laughter and conversation, creating a sense of calm that was hard-earned but deeply satisfying. Sarah poured lemonade into glasses, handing one to each child and one to her husband. "To a peaceful night," she said, raising her glass slightly. Mr. Johnson smiled, meeting her eyes. "To family, understanding, and the lessons we learn along the way," he said softly. The children giggled, clinking their small glasses together, innocent and joyful, unaware of the deeper lessons unfolding around them. The lanterns flickered gently in the evening breeze, casting long shadows across the lawn, and the Johnsons' backyard glowed with warmth and safety. The night, which had begun with tension and suspicion, now carried a sense of resolution and calm. The neighbor's apology had restored peace, and the family's strength and patience had transformed a moment of potential conflict into a story of understanding and growth. Mr. Johnson leaned back slightly, taking in the scene before him. He watched his children play, listened to Sarah's soft conversation, and smelled the faint aroma of grilled food. The night had tested them, revealing the calm strength of the family and the authority of a father who knew how to protect, guide, and teach without anger. The lessons of patience, respect, and quiet power had been lived, and the results were evident in the peace of the evening. Across the street, the neighbor sat quietly by his window, reflecting on the night. He had learned a lesson he would not forget: underestimating others, acting on assumptions, and letting anger guide actions only lead to regret. Respect and understanding, he realized, carried more power than authority alone, and the Johnson family had shown him that in the most subtle, effective way. As the night deepened, the stars began to twinkle above, casting a soft glow on the peaceful neighborhood. The Johnson family continued their dinner, sharing stories, laughter, and warmth. The conflict had passed, but the lessons endured, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. The backyard was alive with life, love, and quiet strength, a safe haven against the world outside. Mr. Johnson glanced briefly toward the street, noting the neighbor's retreat. He knew the man would remember the evening, reflect on his actions, and hopefully choose differently in the future. The family had weathered the storm together, teaching not only the neighbor but also their children about patience, respect, and the quiet power of calm authority. The evening ended on a note of harmony. Plates were cleared, lanterns flickered gently, and the children, tired from play, sat with their parents, enjoying the final moments of the night. Laughter and conversation filled the air, blending with the sounds of the peaceful neighborhood. The tension had dissolved, replaced by understanding, warmth, and the enduring bonds of family. In the quiet glow of the backyard, the Johnson family had triumphed, not through anger or confrontation, but through calm strength, wisdom, and love. The neighbor had learned a lesson in humility, respect, and empathy, while the children had witnessed the power of patience and guidance. And as the night drew on, the family sat together, united, safe, and stronger than ever, ready for whatever challenges might come next. The night had grown deeper, the sky a blanket of stars twinkling faintly above the quiet neighborhood. In the Johnsons' backyard, a soft glow from the lanterns highlighted the smiling faces of a family who had endured tension, fear, and misunderstanding, and had come through it stronger and closer than before. Emma and Noah, finally tired from their play, sat next to their parents, their small hands clutching glasses of lemonade, eyes wide with wonder at the peaceful night around them. Sarah leaned back in her chair, glancing at her husband with a quiet smile. "It's been a long night," she said softly. "But I think everyone learned something today." Mr. Johnson nodded, his calm gaze sweeping over the yard, the children, and the quiet street beyond. "Lessons are sometimes revealed in the moments we least expect," he replied. "Patience, understanding, and quiet strength often speak louder than words or anger. Tonight, everyone, my family, the neighbor, even the officers, learned something about respect." Emma yawned, leaning against her father's arm. "Dad, will he be okay?" she asked softly, referring to Mr. Clark. Mr. Johnson's expression softened. "Yes, Emma," he said gently. "People sometimes act out of fear or misunderstanding. Tonight he saw the truth. He learned, and that's the important part. We can hope he chooses to act with kindness from now on." The children nodded, still too young to understand the full weight of the lesson, but feeling the warmth and security that came from their father's presence. Across the street, Mr. Clark sat quietly by his window, reflecting on the evening's events. He had entered the night full of suspicion, anger, and the desire to control, but the calm authority, patience, and wisdom of the Johnsons had undone every expectation he had held. Shame mixed with understanding as he replayed the evening in his mind. He realized that the conflict could have escalated at any moment, but the father had handled it all without raising his voice or losing composure. The lesson was clear: true authority does not come from power or fear, but from calm guidance, respect, and the ability to teach without aggression. Mr. Johnson stood, stretching slightly, and glanced once more at the quiet street. He saw the neighbor's shadow retreating back inside, and he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The immediate tension had passed, and the family was safe. But he also knew that vigilance and care were never ending. Life presented challenges in many forms, and while tonight had been a test of authority, patience, and courage, tomorrow could bring something entirely new. Sarah gently took his hand, squeezing it in quiet comfort. "You handled everything perfectly," she whispered. Mr. Johnson nodded, returning his attention to the children, who were beginning to settle down near the picnic table. "It's not about being perfect," he said softly, "but about showing strength when it matters, and teaching lessons that last." The children listened quietly, absorbing the calm wisdom in his words, even if they could not fully grasp it yet. The soft glow of the lanterns danced across the backyard, illuminating the simple joys of a family who had weathered misunderstanding and fear. The laughter of the children mingled with the hum of night insects, the aroma of grilled food still lingering faintly in the warm air. For a moment, everything was perfect, yet a subtle suspense remained in the quiet of the neighborhood. The neighbor, the unknown variables of tomorrow, the possibility of new challenges, these reminders hung gently in the air, a quiet whisper that life always held uncertainty. Mr. Johnson knelt to look at his children, brushing back Emma's hair. "Remember," he said softly, "strength is not just in action. It's in patience. In respect. In knowing when to act and when to guide. And tonight, you both saw it." Noah nodded, his eyes wide. "I want to be brave like you, Dad," he whispered. Mr. Johnson smiled, his heart full. "You already are, Noah. Bravery isn't about fighting. It's about standing tall, even when things are uncertain, and helping others understand." Sarah joined them, placing a hand gently on each child's shoulder. "And kindness," she added softly. "Even when someone acts out of fear or anger, we respond with understanding, not anger. That's how we build a strong family and a strong community." The children nodded, still learning, but their small faces reflected curiosity, admiration, and the soft stirrings of respect that would grow over the years. Across the street, Mr. Clark sat silently, reflecting on every word, every action, and every calm gesture he had witnessed. He realized that the evening had given him a lesson he would never forget: authority without patience is fragile, power without respect is hollow. The family across the street had shown him that strength and guidance were most powerful when tempered with empathy. He felt a small, reluctant smile touch his lips. Perhaps he had been wrong, but the chance to learn was worth more than pride. In the backyard, the Johnsons' evening wound down. Plates were cleared, lanterns flickered gently in the cool night breeze, and the children slowly leaned against their parents, tired but content. Mr. Johnson glanced once more toward the street, satisfied that calm and peace had been restored. The lesson had been taught, the tension resolved, and the family remained safe, united, and stronger than ever. The night was quiet now, filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. But even in the calm, there was a subtle sense of anticipation, a whisper that life held more stories, more lessons, and more challenges to navigate. The Johnson family had faced one test and emerged stronger, teaching everyone around them the value of patience, understanding, and quiet authority. Mr. Johnson leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the picnic table. He looked at his family, his eyes softening with pride. "Tonight was a reminder," he said softly, "that love, respect, and understanding can overcome fear, suspicion, and anger. That is the strength we carry every day." Sarah smiled, the children yawned, and the soft glow of lanterns reflected off their faces, creating a scene of peace, warmth, and unity. As the stars shone above and the neighborhood slept quietly, the Johnson family sat together, surrounded by love and lessons learned. Across the street, the neighbor reflected, humbled and wiser. And in that quiet night, the story ended not with conflict, but with understanding, calm authority, and the unspoken promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the family would face them together, stronger, wiser, and united. The night had tested them. The lessons had been learned. And the Johnsons, with patience, courage, and love, had proven that calm strength could turn suspicion into respect, tension into understanding, and fear into lasting peace.